All right, it is time for the May wrap-up, and I believe I was very successful, I think. It feels successful. I had a really good combination of genres. I read things I wanted to read, but I wasn't expecting I'd get to. I read more than I anticipated for like two reasons. One, we did a readathon in my Patreon for a week, and that was really fun. It like carved out at least 2 hours a day that I was reading, which was really good. And I actually got some really good reading done there, got some good focused reading. And then even when my in-laws were in town, I was listening to a lot of audiobooks while I was doing my yard work, which I wasn't anticipating because usually my audiobook time is my commute time, and I didn't have as much commuting to do while we had like the 2-week break before classes started again. So all in all, I'm pretty happy with it. I only really had one book that I really disliked that I finished, if that makes sense. And I don't think I DNF'd anything that I started. I think I read everything. There was one other book I would have DNF'd if I could have. But otherwise, largely wins. And I read enough things that I can do categories, even though like I read a lot of short things, so it's not like a lot of pages this month, but I don't really care about that. So let's start with things I read earlier in the month, and they all kind of fall into this one category of like extra episodes, deleted scenes. That's my category. This is like when you're reading a series and there's like a novella or a short story either added after the fact or in the middle, and it's always that like 1.5 book. That's this, because I actually did that for 3 different series this past month. We'll start with the Inheritance trilogy, because I love that one so much. This one I read the novella that comes after the trilogy, and I read the short stories that come in a little bind up. I think there's like 3 short stories. It's an incredibly short little collection of works in that world. And I love them. I love them so much. I might like The Awakened Kingdom more than some of the books in the Inheritance trilogy. Like, I love it so much. It is about a godling being born and telling their story about how they learned about humanity and their existence in the universe and about their parents and their siblings. And I just think Jemison, when they choose to write from a character point of view that's really unique, does it in a really fun way. I loved their voice. I loved their observations about the universe. I loved the themes of trying to find who you are and how, like, there's a lot of things that are not universal about immortality and mortality in this thought experiment of the Inheritance trilogy. But the whole identity discovery is oddly something that has a lot of overlap and was really interesting to see from this character's point of view. And then the short stories were just fun little snippets. Like, you've met a lot of characters, but you don't always get all their backstory. And some of these characters, you just get this nice little insight into who they are. Like, in the third trilogy, the third book in the trilogy, there's a character we meet, and you get to follow her relationship with her father, which you never got to see on page. And that was, like, really sweet. And unique to their situation and circumstances. So if you love the Inheritance trilogy, these are must-reads. And even if you didn't, I think Awakened Kingdom is just such a fun, fascinating project. I just really like it. It is a little stream of conscious because this godling doesn't understand time, because no gods understand time for the most part. So that's the Inheritance trilogy. And then for Stormlight Archive, I read Edge Dancer. And I believe very soon we're going to be discussing this on Jesse's channel. Keep an eye out. I'm pretty sure we're doing it this an upcoming weekend, but like life happens, so I don't know if it will be happening. I have no clue. I can't remember if we officially decided yet or not. But I read Edge Dancer because I knew we'd be discussing it soon, that and Words of Radiance. So this is the book between Words of Radiance and Oathbringer, and we follow Lift, who is like a very strong supporting character in the Stormlight Archives. And it's funny because I read this pretty much right after The Awakened Kingdom, and they are both characters who are young and have young views on the world, but for some reason Lift just doesn't work as well for me, and not because I think it's bad or even obnoxious. I find myself fairly indifferent and neutral to this novella. Just kind of bored. Part of it's like it's a mystery, and like I don't think the reveals were that interesting even when I didn't know what the reveals would be, because this is, a reread. But also the way that she copes with what she wants to forget from the past. The way she represses her history is done in a way that I think's done better in even other Sanderson characters. Here it just like doesn't hit for me. It just doesn't land at all. It's just a story that is totally fine. And I think sometimes I just, you can be really bored and disappointed by a totally fine experience. So yeah, I read that one. And then the one I read more recently is from Verkosigan Saga, and this is Borders to Infinity, Borders of Infinity. I don't know. It has, the one I read is the bind up with 3 different novellas in it. And it does have like a loose narrative framework around all three. Some of these you could read earlier in the series because they take place at different points chronologically. We just decided to read them all here because I think Borders, like the last novella, is the one chronologically more important going on. I don't know. I just follow the recommended reading order. And I do agree that, like, I didn't feel like, oh no, I should have had this novella before I read this novel to really get context. It didn't feel that way. These do feel like side adventures that Miles went on. And yes, that happened, earlier in the series when he was, at different stages in his career path. But, like, it was just fun seeing Miles problem solve in different situations, as it always is. Like, truly, it's basically just 3 side adventures with Miles, and it was just such a delightfully immersive experience. I will say, and this has been coming up a lot in our discussion in the Discord, this is a sci-fi world with genetics and clone discussions, and I do think that can lead to some very different and interesting thought experiments about maturity of a clone versus maturity of an individual who's quote-unquote naturally born, what can and should be manipulated with genetics, who has a right and say in what genetics get to proliferate. That happens a lot throughout the series. There's a lot about body autonomy and things like that. So I think so far those have been handled well for me, but it's definitely been kind of mixed for other people. So I guess just know that content's around, and that was definitely around in this one because Miles himself is always thought to be a mutant by others, which is like a big taboo in his civilization that he grows up in. But he's not actually a mutant, he just has a disability. But even then, there's this idea of like, why would these mutations even matter in terms of your definition of humanity? It's very complex, and I just think it's a fun world to be in because worlds, if they're well developed, are just inherently messy to begin with. So I enjoy it. Those were great. They were delightful things to listen to while I mowed the lawn and did stuff. So those are my extra chapters. I also read 2 nonfiction this month, so we'll discuss the nonfiction next. The beginning of the month, I can't even believe this was still May, I read Living Resistance, which was kind of it was an indigenous nonfiction text about how basically to live each day in life with, resistance even when it's hard. This one I didn't find stuck with me that much. I was hoping, I think, for more actionable steps than I got. I think this is a good primer. Like, if this is your first, how do I view the world differently? How do I act with resistance book? This is good for a first book. This is by far not my first time reading literature like this. So for me, it was like, yeah, I've already thought about those things. I've already had those things given to me, and there weren't enough, other meat on its bones to make it feel like it should stick in my head. Whereas I've read other nonfiction like Angela Davis, Bridget Kemmerer, a lot of other things that I've actually incorporated subtly into my life. I want to reread Braiding Sweetgrass all the time. So this wasn't bad. It just didn't stick with me. So it's weird because reading nonfiction is just always a very odd experience. But I would say that for me, what I wanted from it, I didn't really get. And who I would recommend it to are people who this is one of their first texts on that. But even then, I think I would recommend other nonfiction texts over this one, unless maybe you have more religious deconstruction to do. This had maybe more of that in it than I was used to in other texts, but since that's not something I personally relate to or work with, maybe just didn't sit with me as much. I don't know. The other one I did really like, even though this was odd because I like this one more, even though I would say arguably it didn't really teach me that much or change how I think, but I kind of knew that going in, and this is Poverty by America. This is the author who did Evicted, and I guess straight up I'm going to say this is not a storyteller narrative nonfiction like Evicted was, which Evicted is not a story. He literally lived with people and is basically conveying their life experiences, but he does it in a way that makes you almost forget you're reading a nonfiction and not a book. That Evicted is a fantastic piece of nonfiction, I feel, in terms of providing facts and empathy in one package, which I feel is the best packaging for trying to change someone's mind on an issue, or at least make them aware and care about a complex issue. This one is more one of your standard nonfictions of just here's the problem, here's what I think a potential solution could be, because I think the thesis of the book is more poverty. Why do we even have it? And could we get rid of it? And there are just some fascinating points that get brought up and things like that. And I just enjoyed listening to it. It was kind of one of those cathartic things. Because again, I don't think I learned that much new because I've been kind of keeping an eye on this and thinking about this. Because that's also how I approach nonfiction a lot of times. Sometimes I'll pick up a nonfiction book because it's I want to know why we got here. I read Open Veins of Latin America because I know it's not just like a natural happenstance that South America's countries are in the state that they're in. I wanted to know, well, how did we get here? And that's one good nonfiction book for that. So similarly here, I'm very attracted to a nonfiction that's attempting to answer a question such as, how and why are we here? And, what did we do as choices in society to get here? Because it's almost always down to our societal choices. Things don't just happen. Decisions were made by people and we got here. And then other decisions could be made to mitigate how we got here. Yeah, I just thought it was a very good nonfiction book, which, everyone usually likes this nonfiction author. So, and I usually read him because I find that he takes points that I already kind of know and makes them into digestible arguments that I can then kind of tweak depending on who I'm discussing things with. So those are the nonfiction. I didn't really take notes today, so I'm trying to make sure I keep track of everything. Let's do my last non-SFF category, and we'll do romance, because I read 2 romance this month, which, who am I? We'll start with Earl's Trip. This is the one that, I would have DNF'd if I wasn't reading this with my friends. I did read it in, a day. It's not that long. It's just not my type of romance, and it's not my type of writing style. And it was just fine. It was just really fine. So this, I don't believe the comp. The comp is supposed to be like Ted Lasso meets Bridgerton. Okay. No. There are no character links to Ted Lasso things. You just have a group of guys going on an Earl's Trip together, and they run into these 2 women for situations. And then so you have these 2 women and these 3 guys all staying in this old house together. So it's Bridgerton, maybe because of the era. I don't even know if it's the same era, but Bridgerton's not the only historical romance thing. It's just the most popular at the moment. So it doesn't feel like Bridgerton. It doesn't feel like Ted Lasso. So ignore that, because it doesn't. It's very slow. I wouldn't even know if I would call it slow burn, but it's friends to lovers. I don't think it's second chance. It's okay. Like I said, it's very okay. And it's a little long. I think it's a little long for what it is. It's 350 pages. I think we could have gotten there quicker. I don't know. But even then, I say that, but even when we got to the romance part of it at the end and the third act breakup, it's just I was very whatever. I know they're going to end up together. I don't really care about them. So for me, it was largely just this is fine. It's okay. Now, the one that gave me insomnia that I was obsessed with, that was Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. I read this within 18 hours and it gave me insomnia because all I wanted to do was read it. It is in the Part of Your World, quote unquote, series. I will say that I would read the first 2 books before this because there are just crossovers that are really fun if you love the world and the characters and you like Easter egg crossovers. Obviously, it doesn't affect the story in itself. But as a fan of the series, it was a fun time. So that's my recommendation there. It's just the crossovers, they make you chuckle, they make you go, no way! And it's just fun. This is the classic trope of everyone always finds the love of their life after they date me, and these 2 individuals kind of try to date each other so that the next person they date is the one. And of course they're the one for each other, right? But there's more involved in terms of heavy topics. They each have really heavy family issues going on in their life. We have one whose mother has just always abandoned her. She ended up in foster care. She's a travel nurse and just has a lot of commitment issues as a result and doesn't even really know that she has those. And it does represent itself in PTSD and extreme anxiety. And it is a huge barrier in the story for her and basically finding her love. And then our hero, I think, what's his name? I related too much to the hero, but I forget his name because I forget everyone's name. But his mother is going to jail for embezzling. And so suddenly he is responsible for taking care of all of his siblings who are on the younger side. He is, I think in his 30s as a software engineer. And his siblings are still in high school. And one of them is actually very young. And his father passed away a couple years previously. So he's suddenly going to be in this role of caretaker and father. And, he's pretty bitter about what his mother's been putting the family through. And so these 2 people, they're in the same area. And we basically just get to see them be in denial about their relationship. And, the third act is hard. The third act falling out is tricky. But I think Abby Jimenez always really handles these things with care that I really appreciate. And I do always love when people in romances get to go through traumatic things and heal. I like seeing that. There's a really strong catharsis for that in me. So, Just for the Summer really good. Also, if you're someone who doesn't like really like spicy scenes, I think she's a good author because like her sex scenes aren't like very involved, but she's really good at like the tension and build up and the flirting and the chemistry. Like I think her chemistry is really good, even though there isn't a lot of on-page action in my opinion compared to other romance authors. So like I think in that way she can be a way more accessible author than say maybe even Hallie Hazelwood. So those are my thoughts there. So now into some science fiction. This will be my dystopian science fiction, and I will get again into a book that like I probably shouldn't have finished, and this is Womb City. I wanted to like this book a lot. Like I bought a copy. I read the short stories by this author. I like the short stories. I've always thought the short stories were very experimental and wild and dark and disturbing, just very interesting art. You couldn't look away. I thought this was fairly straightforward and very long. And, like, the genre matchup didn't work for me. So the premise of this is we're in Botswana in the far future, and it's got that cyberpunk theme of your consciousness can go into different bodies. And there are rules for this in this world. I never quite felt comfortable in being able to explain the rules, even though they were repeated so many times, but never in a way that I felt like I understood. Like, you get X number of lifetimes and they last this long, but if something happens and you get kicked out of this body, you go on a waiting list. It was involved and confusing to me. It was very confusing. But the key thing is that there is a lot of emphasis placed on what the body has done. So if you are put into a body, and you don't get to choose which body you're put into most of the time, unless you're like mega rich. But if you're put into a body that has a criminal record, then you have less freedoms than someone with a body that doesn't have a criminal record. And it doesn't matter what your consciousness has done before. So our main character is in a chipped body. And she has a relationship with her husband who's a part of the police force. And like from the get-go, you're like, yeah, this is a toxic relationship. And they're trying to have a kid. It's like this big thing for our main character that she wants to be a mother. She's had many miscarriages. It's been very traumatic for her. And she's convinced that a family will fix her problems, which I already have an issue with that premise to begin with because it's just a lie, right? Like, and it's a lie that I think the author is also aware of. It's not like I think the author is preaching this, but it's just like, this main character is trying to fix her problems in ways that won't fix her problems. And also, it's tough seeing her being, treated poorly in the society, but also her internal monologue is so repetitive and on the nose, and it's just, it's very preachy in a way that I found exhausting. And then around the third way point, she makes a decision that I hated. Like, I just hated the decision she made, and then I had to watch the fallout of that decision for the next 2/3 of the book. And, like, things come to light, and it's not, it's basically implied that there was nothing she could have done to not end up in this situation or something. But, like, it still didn't make it fun. I still didn't have a fun time. I think people who like action-backed, like, horror dystopians would have more fun with this, but that said, I usually like horror dystopians quite a bit. Action-packed is a little less my thing, and this was very, like, go, go, go from, like, the third way point to the end. There's a countdown clock. In theory, there are twists and turns and reveals, but none of those matter to me. But they are there. Like, objectively, I'm like, yeah, that was an interesting reveal. Yeah, yep, I mean, I guess I felt like there was something amiss, but I didn't think it was that. Like, it was... I don't know. I didn't have a good time. I was really, like, struggling to finish this come the end of it. If I didn't do my Patreon readathon, like, I don't think I would have finished this. But I did, and I'm bummed. But there is a chance that you would have a better time than me. I know Rachel from Shades of Orange has like a 5-star review for this. So, and she does not give out 5 stars lightly. So if you have any similar taste to her, I would give it a chance. Maybe watch her review, all that stuff. The other dystopian, I'm calling it dystopian because a lot of the stories felt dystopian, is Bloodchild by Octavia Butler. This was fascinating to read, and I think my favorite parts were the essays, so I need to, find more essays to read by Octavia Butler, because I think her essay work was really fun to read. So there's 2 essays in this, and like 6 or 7 short stories and novellas, and if you've read other Octavia novellas, so like, if you're like me and you've been reading in publication order, Octavia Butler, because that's what I decided to do at some point, because I think I started with Kindred, and then I read the whole Patternist series, and I read Xenogenesis. And then I went out of order because I was invited to read Parabel the Sower and Parabel the Talents with Tammy and Aaron for her book club. And then I went backwards to read Bloodchild and then eventually Fledgling. And so Bloodchild, you can really see when she was playing around with certain ideas that hadn't yet come into novels yet, specifically a lot of alien-human encounters, which is like a big theme in Xenogenesis. There are also stories that play with otherness and certain genetic mutations, which is very reminiscent of Pattern Master series. In general, it's the same as most Octavia Butler in that she's asking uncomfortable questions and putting you in uncomfortable situations. And also, it's still very much playing with a lot of sci-fi ideas and tropes of the times in which she wrote them. Like, one thing I don't love, but is very prevalent in the late 20th century, are pheromones and smells and their control over you and your animal instincts, which I don't really love as a sci-fi tool, but it was very common back then, and she uses it quite a bit. So that was it's just like funny to see and think about. I loved her different interactions with aliens now that I've seen, like, I think I've seen 4 versions of her human and aliens kind of thought experiment now. And also there are author notes after like all the stories. So it's very interesting seeing what has inspired her. Like, I didn't realize that sometimes a lot of the relationship dynamics she explores are inspired by stories she read in the Bible growing up and going to church, which kind of makes things make a little bit more sense. But yeah, and that was a really fun discussion we had in the Discord because this is our Patreon buddy read. So 1 more Octavia Butler down, only 1 more to go. And it makes me kind of sad. And I think I've saved the most difficult to read for last. I'm not sure. A lot of people hate Fledgling, but I'm not sure if those people have read Clay's Arc. And that's an important question to me because Clay's Arc is like really dark. It's disturbing. Like, I have a really high threshold for the ick factor. Like, I do. I have a very high threshold. And like Clay's Arc is, I mean, I like Clay's Arc. I gave it 4.5 stars, but it's still disgusting. Like, it's disgusting. Anyways, so that's the other dystopian. So I don't have notes today, so I'm like really hoping I haven't forgotten anything. I don't think that I have yet, somehow. And I think my last category is, I called them broken systems because I think that's what they had in connection with each other. And these happen to actually be my favorite reads of the month as well, which I don't know what that says about me, that I enjoy reading the broken systems books, because I guess I could have put my nonfiction in here too, but it just felt weird putting nonfiction and fiction with each other. These are also both like kind of inspired by other literature type books, but that didn't seem as fun as saying just like broken systems. All right, first one, 7 Surrenderers. This is the second book in Terra Ignota, and this is basically a saga following the fall of this utopian civilization. So basically this book is where we really highlight everything that was broken, that got brought to the forefront into like the lightning. And we're just reveal after reveal after reveal. And the questions that you keep thinking about who was in the right or wrong, and that's the whole point. It's very fun. I think it's really interesting how it's difficult to decide if something that was horrendous was wrong to do. And that's like the big thing that this story's trying to unpack. And yeah, I'm excited to continue the 3rd book. And then the one that I didn't think I'd get to, but was on my like goals video. So I read a book on my goals video. I actually read like 2 books on my goals video this month. Poverty and Demon Copperhead, which took me a long time. Like, I was reading it while my in-laws were in town. So that was just going to take a while anyways. And I physically read it, and I listened to it, and I immersion read it. I did all the ways of reading it, but it's like an over 500-page literary fiction, general fiction book. So it took me a minute. But I loved it pretty much from the first page. Like, I really like this story. So I have not read David Copperfield, which is apparently the Dickens this is based off of. I did, after reading Demon Copperhead, look at a synopsis of David Copperfield, and I do think there are some key differences that would make it so maybe I wouldn't like David Copperfield as much. Regardless, there are some very by-the-book retelling transitions, except this takes place in the 90s, like late 80s into the 90s. I think it's Virginia. I'm pretty sure it's Virginia, but it's very close to West Virginia. It's Appalachia. It's basically Appalachia, which I never get to read a lot of books in that part of the United States, so that was very interesting. And Demon is the one telling his story, and he has a very strong storytelling voice that I really latched onto and enjoyed. It really helped me in this story because this is a heavy story. Because I've read other books that like I've hated that I think cover similar ground to this, and I think part of why I hated those books is I didn't have anything to latch onto while I was drowning in the sorrow, and Demon's voice is something to latch onto for me. So for example, Shuggy Bane has a child who has to grow up in a really bad system world with a mother who abuses drugs and basically makes him grow up too fast. Like, that has a lot of overlap with Demon Copperhead, but I really don't like Shuggy Bane, like, a lot. And Demon Copperhead is like a 5-star for me. And I do think the key difference is the storytelling focus on moments of hope versus the moments of failure and distress. I do think I just need a little bit more of a balance, especially when it involves addiction and drugs, because of that connection in my own life with my own family. Because what this is also focusing on is the opioid epidemic and essentially kind of its early beginnings in the United States, and how that in particular affects lower income cities and communities in the United States, where it's kind of almost intentional how they were being targeted. So Demon Copperhead, he grows up to a mom who's an alcoholic, so already things are rough. He ends up in the foster care system, and like basically this whole story, like he's telling you his story, so like I guess in some ways you just know he doesn't die, but you know things get worse before they get better. And you just, watching our approach to rock bottom and getting out of rock bottom, there's just a lot of emotions. There was like a scene where I was like almost crying on a drive because it's just so much world is not fair. I've been telling people in my Discord, like, people who really like watching Fitz Chivalry, Farseer, I think would like this, except I think Demon's voice for telling the story is better for me than Fitz's voice for telling the story. And I think, again, that comes to the fact that Demon is a resilient character. And, like, obviously not everyone has to be resilient who goes through these things, but it makes it easier for me, as, like, someone consuming the story, to be with a character with, like, a dark sense of humor, who can see the light and the dark in moments, who can rationalize that what they did didn't make sense, but also be like, but I don't really regret it because I did it because I loved them. Like, I don't know, like, there was a lot about Demon that I felt really connected to and sympathetic for, and easy to root for, even though you just knew he was going to get kicked down again and again. Like, and especially when you're reading a story about, you know, drug addiction and opioids, when people around him, when he starts using, you're just like, no, but like, you can't, it's, and there's so many moments where you think things will be better and they're not. But at the end of the day, it was just such an epic coming of age story. And, you know, it takes a lot for me to think that a general fiction book deserves to be more than 500 pages. But I think this one was. Like, it took me a long time to read, but it felt like reading back before I did a channel or anything like that. It was just like, yeah, I picked it up and I read as much as I could each day, and then I kept going. And it was just like, I was with Demon Copperhead for a week and a half. Like, I just hung out with him, heard his story, saw different moments of his life, because you start with, from when he was born until, like, he's in his late 20s to 30s. And yeah, a lot happens in that time. But I don't want you to think it's an easy story. I just think it's easier than other versions of this story because of Demon's voice. There's a lot of heavy content in this. A lot of content I usually personally avoid because I get really stressed about it because of the addiction issues my family has had. But I do actually think a lot of it's handled with empathy and care, and it's just not so depressing, I guess. And for me, with these type of topics, I need a good balance of realism, but also the realism of the fact that even when life is hard, you're still living. And I think that's sometimes a lot of lit fic, when they handle heavy things, kind of forget. It's why I like Nightcrawling. Nightcrawling really worked for me because even though her life was awful in Oakland, California, like, she had such a bad time, the story still focused on the moments of joy, like making waffles and pancakes with the boy across the way in the hallway for his birthday. Like, I need a combination, personally. All right, that was this reading month. I thought it was really good. Like, I'm just so happy that I read some books that I didn't even think I'd get to, like Borders of Infinity, Poverty, Demon Copperhead, just for the summer. Like, all those are books I've been wanting to read, and, like, I guess I'm just kind of shocked that I read them, which is silly, right? Like, I have complete control over what I read, but sometimes I think you put things on a TV, I was like, oh yeah, it'd be fun if I read that. Like, that'd be good. But when you actually, like, get to reading it and then it does meet your expectations, I think that's just special. All right, if you don't want to tell me what you've been reading or any thoughts on the books that I've mentioned in this video, and you can leave me emoji. I don't know. Leave me a farm-related emoji for Demon Copperhead. Sure, something like that. And otherwise, like if you liked it, subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.